Good afternoon, everybody. Tom, can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to our SN COVID-19 Town Hall. We're here going on a month and a week, I believe. And just a reminder, if you're experiencing any audio issues, please use your call-in number provided at the time of registration, just due to the increasing use of this webinar platform. Here are all the beautiful faces of our presenters this afternoon with the addition of a guest speaker from Snyder. We have Kristi Weierbach for Workforce, Phil Keeney for Technology, Tom Mowell covering the Regulatory, Chad Bumbaugh and Steve Snyder on Cash Flow, and Katie Boshniak for Human Resources. Just a few housekeeping items before we move on into our next steps and I pass it off to Tom. You can customize what you're seeing right now through the GoToWebinar screen viewer. And we are asking that all attendees insert the questions into the questions panel of their GoToWebinar tab, as we do not monitor the chat box. And if you could, please drop your questions into the following buckets so we can better sort through those. Workforce, technology, regulatory, cash flow, and human resources will all be addressed today. And the slide deck that you are seeing right now is available for download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. And again, if you're experiencing any audio issues, just please use the dial-in option that coordinates with your registration rather than the computer audio. We're just finding that the phone is giving us less problems. And please note that all the information presented today is based on what we know on April 28th, 2020 at 2:02 p.m., as this remains a fluid situation, which we will always say week to week. And just a few next steps. Our next town hall, as we decided to extend it through the month of May, as needed, is May 5th, same place, same time, 2 to 4 o'clock. And additionally, we're just asking that you visit our COVID-19 section of our website for any additional insight and information. There's a few great blogs, great downloadables out there. And lastly, to reach out to us via our website on the Contact Us page if your questions do not get answered today. And here's our agenda today. I'm going to pass it off to Tom here shortly for our introduction. And we will have a regulatory, a cash flow PPP update, and a workforce update today before moving into our guest speaker from Snyder. And then we will have our roundtable with all of our expert panelists the next 30 to 60 days. And then we will have our Q&A portion. And we did carve out some time today to get to that Q&A this afternoon. And with that, Tom, do you want to take over for me?
Well, you bet, Chris, Kaylee, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us again this week. These weeks certainly are seeming to go by quite quickly here lately with a lot of things happening. As Kaylee said, we had originally intended to just take these town halls out through the end of April, but there still seems to be so much uncertainty coming down the pike that we're going to stay with you at least throughout the month of May and as long as it takes. Things are changing rapidly, although we didn't get quite as many changes at the last minute this week as we have in some of the prior weeks. So that helps the speakers relax a little bit with their material today. But certainly I know a lot of you are aware that the Paycheck Protection Program funding reopened again yesterday, and Chad's certainly going to talk about that. And we still continue to hear a lot of talk about more programs to come, whether that's phase 4 or what that might be. I just heard this morning there's talks of more middle-class tax relief coming. Certainly none of that is for certain at this point, but we're going to be keeping abreast of that. And as those things happen, we're certainly going to be sharing those with you and trying to answer your questions. As Kaylee said, we have a very full agenda for you again this week. We'll get through the regulatory updates, I think, fairly quickly with myself, Chad, and Kristi providing those, but we certainly don't want to shortchange some of those things that you're very interested in. And then we are very pleased to have Mike Crescenzi. And Mike, I hope I didn't butcher your name too badly there. Mike is an employment law and litigation partner with the Snyder Law Group, and we're thrilled to have him with us today to talk about some employment and personnel issues. That'll lead us into our roundtable that Kristi Weierbach moderates, and Mike will certainly participate on that. As we do again, continue to talk about the reopening of our businesses and what is sure to be a new normal. We're certainly encouraged that a number of states are in the process. I believe I heard 16 states now have formal plans for reopening. I know Georgia kind of led the way on that last week, and we certainly have our fingers crossed and are praying that everything goes smoothly and we're starting to flatten this curve and get on the other side of this pandemic. So we're certainly going to be keeping in touch with that. And we want to talk to you a lot, I think, about those type of things to keep in mind as your businesses move into that next stage. As we said, we also, I know we ran out of time last week. We had so much material that we didn't have any live Q&A. We certainly are going to strive to do so this week. But even if the questions do not get answered during the session, as we always do, we will be following up with all those questions and distributing emails and links to everyone that they can see the questions from each week. So we want to get all that in front of you. Again, please stay in contact with us at any time during the week. I know things do happen between Tuesdays. If something significant happens and we need to pull together a new session, we'll certainly do that. But if not, please reach out to us at SN at any time. You can get to us through that contact page at the website or through any of us individually that you may have a relationship or know. We'll get other information out as it becomes available as well through the website. I know I've mentioned this in other weeks, but we have a lot of good documents out there to help you, some cash flow information, some steps about opening your business, and certainly a lot of stuff on the Paycheck Protection Loan. Chad did a very detailed walkthrough last week of how forgiveness might work. Those slides are available at the website if you'd like to review those. We do have other events coming up here in the near term. I talked last week about a session for 8 architecture and engineering firms on cash flow boosting activities that we'd originally scheduled for May 12. Well, that is a Tuesday, with us now deciding to extend the town halls. We've rescheduled that. That's going to be on May 22nd. But if you are in the architecture and engineering community, we would certainly encourage you to join us on that day, as we'll talk about some specific tax-related cash flow activities that you may want to think about doing. We certainly have our user group meetings coming up on both the Vision and the Azure software platforms, and certainly any sessions, including these town halls and other webinars that we've done in the past, are available for demand on our website at the events page. So with that, I'm going to kick over into the tax update and regulatory update. Not a lot of new stuff this week, so it's going to be more of just a review and just a couple of things I wanted to make sure you were aware of. Just about every week, we start out talking about the economic stimulus payments, the direct payments to taxpayers. There was a little bit more movement on that this past week. The IRS did issue a new FAQ, or an enhanced FAQ, on the direct payment program. It's very comprehensive. I've been through it. It's very good. If you have any question at all about why you have not received your stimulus payment yet, I would encourage you to go there. It's on the front page of the IRS's website at www.irs.gov. And it walks through, I think it's about 32 questions there that talk about how you can enter your direct deposit information if it's not on file, how to calculate the payment, why or why not you might be receiving a payment. A lot of good stuff there. The IRS also upgraded that portal, the Get Your Payment portal, over this past weekend. A lot more people, I think, were able to actually get in there and enter their direct deposit information and other information to kind of get you on the process of getting your payment. I will warn you that if you go in there and you want to check and you haven't been in before, have your most recently filed tax return, or even your 2018 and 2019 tax return, by your side. They're going to ask you some questions about what your income level was, did you owe money, did you get a refund, and such. And if you don't have luck putting the 2019 information in, it may mean that they haven't processed that return yet. You might want to then jump back and actually put the 2018 information in. One other thing that I'll throw out there that we're learning is the first round of payments that went out by direct deposit were for the most part, to people who had refunds in the past that were direct deposited to their bank accounts. Even if you paid balances due to the IRS previously by direct draft of your account, and you have bank information in there, they're not carrying that over for payments. So if you did pay by direct withdrawal, I would still encourage you to go into this website, the Get Your Payment website, and enter your bank information to speed up your refund. Otherwise, you will get it, but it may come by paper check and take a little bit longer. If there's any kind of a problem at all with your bank account and they try to deposit and it gets rejected, that'll just automatically flip it into a paper check. So we just have to have a little bit of patience there. The payments should be coming for everyone. It's just going to be a kind of a staggered schedule on that. But if there's any questions we can answer in regards to that, we're happy to do so. A couple of other items that I think are important and worth repeating are some of the payroll-related items that are available. We certainly talked about the ability for employers to defer the employer's share of the Social Security tax on their employees' wages. You can do that for the remainder of 2020, pushing those payments out, 50% of them to the end of 2021, 50% to the end of 2022. If you have taken advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program, you can only do so until the date that you're granted forgiveness on your loan, but that still could be a little ways into the future. You've got that 8-week period that you measure the forgiveness, and then we're hearing that the banks could take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to grant you the forgiveness. So an ability, if you're looking for some cash flow, almost an interest-free line of credit to take advantage of that. Also, don't forget that if you were forced to pay leave under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act or the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act for folks that are off with COVID-related symptoms or taking care of dependent children, there are payroll tax credits available to offset those wages you're paying. And as we talked about last week, the FAQ the IRS has put out on that now has 67 questions on it. It covers just about every scenario. You can find that at the IRS website as well. A reminder, don't send paper to the IRS. We did hear this week the IRS is starting to bring some of their employees back online, but those service centers are still very backed up, and that mail is sitting. You're going to have much better luck if you can correspond with the IRS via electronic means. File tax returns electronically. If you're filing the net operating loss carrybacks that we've talked about, which normally have to be filed in paper, the IRS has put together a couple of fax numbers that you can send those payments in on. Last week we covered a number of ideas for cash flow savings regarding taxes. I'm not going to go through all of them this week, but I will again throw out my favorite, the research and development tax credit. We had really good response to that last week. We've talked to a number of you already about the possibilities of utilizing the R&D tax credit, not only for those things that you may do to bring your business kind of into the new normal and things you may have to implement in 2020, but some of you, whether you're in the architecture, engineering, construction world, whether you're in the manufacturing world, whether you're in a technology company, an agricultural company, you quite likely have already been doing activities that qualify for the credit, and we can take a look back to prior year tax returns to generate credits on your behalf, which could turn into fairly, I won't say immediate, but short-term refunds to put some cash back into your businesses. So we're happy to talk offline to you about that and whether your activities may qualify. My last bullet point before I turn it over to Chad is just a warning. Don't get too excited about this one yet, but we just want to warn you that while we know that the forgiveness on the Paycheck Protection Loan Program is going to be tax-free for federal tax purposes, we don't have that same certainty with the states. There's been a number of articles written. I know Bloomberg did a big piece on this, that the states won't automatically give you forgiveness from tax on it. We know the state budgets are being beaten up very badly here by all the costs here, the drop in revenues from the lack of commerce and so on. So the states are going to be hungry for revenue. So will they or will they not tax this forgiveness? That's going to be a decision that's really made state by state. There's not a lot of uniformity from state to state. Now, we do have a concept of something called conformity in the states. So what conformity means is a state's tax code will conform to the federal tax code with certain exceptions. And we have two types of conformity. One is called rolling conformity. And what rolling conformity means is as soon as the Internal Revenue Code, the Federal Revenue Code changes, that state automatically adopts those changes unless they take specific action to, and the technical term is decouple, but that basically means step away from a provision in the federal. But that takes, I guess, proactive steps by the state to not agree with what the federal government's doing. A good example is we've had the very lucrative bonus depreciation and immediate expensing of capital assets at the federal level for many years. And even some of those states that do a rolling conformity with the Internal Revenue Code have decoupled from those provisions or aren't giving you those same deductions. So the rolling conformity states may or may not exempt us from state tax, but they may decouple with it. And another thing that I read is rolling conformity means that we conform to the Internal Revenue Code at the state level. Well, this forgiveness granted by the PPP program was not written into the Internal Revenue Code. It was written into the Small Business Act as, it's part of the SBA. And there is some debate whether states will honor their rolling conformity because they are going to say we conform to the Internal Revenue Code, and this is not part of that. So I know that's a technicality, but it's something to certainly be alert to. Other states do what we call fixed date conformity, which means they conform to the Internal Revenue Code as of a specific point in time, and they will periodically update that. Well, the CARES Act, which introduced the PPP program, was effective on March 27th of this year. So if that state has not rolled forward their fixed date conformity to March 27th or later, more than likely they're going to tax that forgiveness. Now, I don't want you to all be, overly alarmed by that. We do think the states, many of them will get in line and they will exempt it from tax, but we have to watch for that. And even if they don't, certainly the state taxes are generally much less than the federal taxes. So I don't want to minimize the tremendous benefit you're getting there at the federal level. So with that said, I'll stop talking about the PPP program and move it over to Chad, who will talk a little bit more about that. So Chad, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Tom. And definitely some interesting updates on the PPP and some things we'll keep our eyes and ears open for on the tax front. But I want to provide a couple updates on the funding stream since we last spoken. And what I'll start with is, unfortunately, the forgiveness guidance that we keep hoping to see any minute has not yet come through. So I just looking at the Treasury site here while Tom was chatting, and nothing thus far today. I'm hoping it hits any moment, any day. But I do want to update you on what has happened since we last met. So if we can move to the next slide. The big news is that round 2 of the PPP funding kicked off yesterday. So the race is on to for the small businesses that did not participate in round 1 that have the need to get some funding. And a couple things that I want to mention related to that is, kind of interest to businesses that maybe are working on finalizing their application right now for the PPP, is that the SBA did put out a guide, a fairly comprehensive document on how to calculate loan amounts. So that came out over the weekend in anticipation of round 2. So if you are in the process of that application, I would suggest you take a look at the Treasury's website and just make sure you're following the rules. You want to make sure that we aren't delaying that application by a miscalculation, and it's broken down by entity type. So it is a good document. Just a brief aside on round 2, Monday got off to a slow start. The SBA's E-Trans system got quickly overloaded. I'm really not surprised because of the number of applications that were in the queue that were not funded in round 1. So there were some hiccups yesterday. It seems like for the number of clients that I've heard, receive approvals here in the last, I'd say, 12 to 24 hours, that things are picking back up, and Route 2 seems to be moving forward at this point in time. There were also 2 interim final rules on eligibility and also seasonal employee considerations that were issued. I'm going to hit on a couple of the comments around the eligibility rules, but I'm not going to hit on all of those items because I think it's a pretty narrow audience that are impacted by some of these items. But the eligibility ties into a couple other comments I'm going to make, so we'll revisit that momentarily. And I will just note the calculations on the loan amount guidance that I mentioned initially in this section. That was largely consistent with what we had been discussing and advising earlier. I really didn't see much in the way of any surprises in that document. So for those of you that maybe were wondering if there's anything we did wrong, if you've been attending the webinars and following the guidance that the Treasury and other entities have put out, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape on that calculation. So if we can move over to slide 2, or excuse me, the next slide. What we're gonna hit about now is really, I think, what has caught a lot of folks' interest outside of the round 2 funding, and that is this concept of need. And I'm going to start by tying that into the final rule on eligibility that was issued on the 24th. I'm sure everybody's seen the media headlines about some of the public company recipients of the PPP funds and the question of need that has arisen. The Treasury did update their frequently asked questions document with question 31 to provide a little bit of insight into what their thoughts are around this. And you'll see the quote there that basically public companies with substantial market value and access to capital markets, they really don't think that those entities are going to be able to make the citation below in good faith in regards to the certification. And that the white text there is lifted right out of the PPP application. And again, it says the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. So why am I starting here, and how does that tie into the eligibility rule? Well, this interim rule on eligibility gives guidance that if the PPP loans are returned by May 7th, the above certification is deemed to have been made in good faith. So if somebody receives these funds and decides that, really we don't meet that definition of need, you can return them by May 7th. Basically, no harm, no foul in terms of the SBA's view of your position. And that's why you're seeing so many of the companies in the headlines starting to return these funds, the bad PR, and also this is the chance for them to get out from under any scrutiny that may come. The one thing that was hot off the press today from the Treasury, it was more of an announcement than anything, as there really was not any details provided, is that there's going to be a full audit of PPP loans that were granted of more than $2 million. So they're going to look at the validity of the need and also at the documentation that's required. And now this is an SBA communication through the Treasury. It did also mention that there will be further guidance coming about the audits, and they mentioned today in the article I read. I've not seen that as of yet. And I'm not sure if they're saying that the guidance is specific to the audit procedures or the forgiveness that we're all anxiously awaiting for. So I'm not quite sure what we're going to see today, but I'm hopeful that we start to get these questions around forgiveness answered in the very near term. So that's kind of where we stand. And I guess I kind of want to go, maybe give some opinions on my own personal opinions, not necessarily that of the firm or others in it. But, when we step back and just think about these comments and really some of the media scrutiny that we're seeing on, you have the latest was this morning, the LA Lakers got around a $4 million loan. So, that's I think they said $400 billion entity taking a PPP loan of around $4 million. So they're now in the media's crosshairs. You have Roofs Chris, Auto Nation, Steak Shack. Those were all entities that got over $10 million. All public or very large companies that have caught the Treasury's attention here for sure. And it seems like that's really who that question 31 is pointed to in regards to clarifying who they are of the opinion cannot make that certification. So with that said, where I'm going is, and what my opinions are, is that absent changes in the PPP guidance or the final forgiveness rules, really, I would not deter a small business that has need, that's facing uncertainty, reduced operations, uncertainty of when you're going to open back up, from applying and taking the PPP funds. again, I think there should be a need that's there, or that uncertainty is present. And even businesses that continue to operate and have revenues, perhaps at a lesser level, and have cash and cash flow, are allowed to take these loans. There's nothing saying that if you have revenues coming in, or you have a bank balance over X or Y, that you're ineligible for these loans, or that, maybe said another way, that you don't have any revenue and don't have any liquidity. There are none of those items. I've seen a lot of those comments and just some opinions, and really, if you read the guidance, there's nothing definitive around eligibility. Again, when I look at this from the small businesses perspective, from the clients that I work with, there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Again, we really won't know the full impact of this situation for months until businesses are back up and running, so that they know what the new normal looks like for them. Even if you are operating, how much of your revenue that you're generating now might go uncollected if you're not, collecting the cash at the point of sale. We just don't know what that's going to look like. How much capital are you going to need to get your business back up and ready for operations? Thinking about the manufacturers that need to buy supplies, to be able to make the inventory that's going to be needed in the supply chains. And really, the spirit of the PPT was intended to keep employees on payroll and allow businesses to be positioned to operate when the economy is, approaching normalcy and starts to open back up again. And again, I think about the typical small business, and I think there's definitely the need there for that liquidity to help with that. And you pair that with some of the articles and headlines you read about the small business failure rate as a result of the COVID-19 situation. And again, my opinion is I don't think it's a stretch for many non-public companies, small businesses, to meet that criteria at all. That's just kind of my editorial comment. I really don't want to see a business that has that need shy away from taking those loans to help them stay in business, to help them keep their employees off the unemployment rolls, to help them meet their capital and their liquidity needs. I just don't want the media to scare folks away from that. We're here as a trusted advisor to help you through the forgiveness calculation if needed, and hopefully we're going to see firmer guidance so that this doesn't become kind of a very unclear target, which it remains today. And ultimately, if you decide at a later date, if you take the loan and decide that, really, I don't feel that we should or are right to take it and have the forgiveness, if you did not need it, you can always return the funds at the end of the day. But this is the way I look at it. I've called it a couple of times in conversations, working capital insurance. So even if you don't take the loan itself as permanent capital, you are getting an infusion of cash for a period of time that you can use just to shore up your operations to get over this uncertainty. So again, that's just kind of my aside on those comments. So if we can go ahead and we'll move to the next slide. What I thought was prudent to do was to provide some considerations to just prepare you as we're thinking about and hearing more and more about this need and the documentation for what maybe should I be thinking about and jotting some notes down right now while we're dealing with the issues and the day-to-day situations. Why do I have this uncertainty? And what is my case? Because on the back end, 8, 10, 12 weeks from now, when we're in the process of wrapping up the forgiveness, we may be struggling for all those things that are keeping us up at night. So I just have a list of 6 or 8 items here that I think are warrant. Just give us some thoughts and discuss and jot down how these items have impacted you. If you had to be shut down, cash flow, liquidity, obviously. Declines in your volume. And I won't read all these, but I think the key one I want to point out there is, again, the workforce. The whole matter around this is the whole goal is to keep employees off of unemployment and employees to return to work. So chat about the employees that you've not laid off. How many employees were you able to keep on your payroll through this process? And then, think about just what were the damages that were incurred. Maybe we weren't able to perform in a contract, and maybe we actually had to basically pay our way out of that contract because we couldn't perform as obligated. And think about the investments in getting your facility ready for operations in the new world that we're going to face, the PPE, all of those types of items. No better time to jot those down now, and it may even be therapeutic to do so as you think about, just this media commentary about need, and maybe that's causing a little bit of stress internally. So jot down the why, and that might help you to some extent. So those are just some thoughts on how you can maybe prepare for the back end of this with the continued uncertainty around the hurdles. So if we can move to the last slide that I have today. Again, I just want to reiterate some of the key points for forgiveness. I was really hoping that we could walk through, maybe not as quite as much depth as we did last week, but the final forgiveness rules, and maybe hone in on some of the changes from what we shared in last week's presentation. But unfortunately, we don't have those at this time. So I just wanted to do a couple reminders of some of the key points. And I shared last week, think of the PPP money as water coming out of the faucet, and these various cylinders that can catch some of the water. So I just want to walk down through those again. Again, remember the 75-25 rule for your cost for the loan forgiveness. Keep in mind your FTE measurements, the salary thresholds. We can't go below 75% of prior COVID-19 salaries to be able to obtain full forgiveness. So all those items are still there. I think are still very important to keep in mind to businesses that are getting the PPP either round 1 or now round 2. But they're there and very relevant in the next steps. And then a couple of the strategies to monitor around those items are, think about getting your employees who maybe you have furloughed temporarily or given them periodic short weeks, things like that. Bring them back to full time to the extent that you're able, from the reduced schedules, and also with the folks that are furloughed. Let's meet the spirit of the law. Get employees off the unemployment rolls. Have them start to work if they're able to on preparing your business to return to operations. Doing some process improvements, doing some personal improvements. We talked about project management for those of us that manage projects. Training and education on those types of items. And then, restoring the salary reductions that may have occurred. And a comment I have there about bonuses, really, I was thinking mainly about the hazards, so the hazard pay type item for the folks that are working in the risky times right now. But also think about, if you do pay bonuses generally on an annual basis, maybe at the end of the year. Keep in mind that things like that, and also irregular compensation like commissions, incentive pays, items like that, those are likely included in your loan base. And if you're not paying those out during the 8-week period of forgiveness, you're going to have a little bit of a reduction in your compensation levels compared to that benchmark. So you may want to give some thought to accelerating some of the bonus payments, looking at taking your commission-based structure and annualizing that, and including some of those costs and salary into this period to make sure that you're not shortchanging yourself on the forgiveness front. And again, we've been helping a number of clients along the way with some of these strategies right now. We're glad to assist with reviewing plans for recalling employees, the salary structure, and just talk through what we know today and what that looks like on the forgiveness side. We have also had a couple situations where clients are essentially saying, I'm just overloaded trying to figure out how to get my folks back on the payroll, with managing the facilities preparations, all of those things. We really just need you to take this forgiveness ball and run with it and make sure that we're getting what we're entitled to based on our behaviors and actions during this 8-week period. So, again, if there's anything that we can do to assist, please reach out. We're glad to help, glad to entertain a conversation at any time. But I just thought it was important not to lose track of these items, because even though we don't have the final rules, the clock on those that have gotten round 1 funding is, continuing to move. So we want to make sure we draw attention and mindset on those items and keep them top of mind. So that is everything that I have this afternoon. Thank you all for attending. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kristi.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to give you a moment of break from our voices here and launch a polling question that we hope you'll participate in. So Kaylee, if you'll kick that off for us. We're interested to see how confident are you about PPP and forgiveness. So we'll give it a minute or so and then launch the results where everybody's at. All right, you should see the results on your screen now. So a lot of you are very confident, which is great. Glad to hear that. Some of you are feeling like us, you know, we're feeling okay, but still just waiting for that further guidance to come out. And it's nice to see that many of you are not confident. So if there's anything we can do to help the 1% here today, clarify something for you, please feel free to put that in the Q&A spot, and we'll go ahead and address those throughout the remainder of this session. So my part is going to focus largely on the regulation side of the workforce. As we get to the roundtable, we will dig deeper into some of the things that we can expect as we bring people back to work. But I wanted to point out that thankfully the DOL FAQs have subsided a little bit. There's been no new ones added to the list since I talked to you last week. For those who weren't on the call, there is categories now. And so the Department of Labor really tried to help us streamline maybe our searching efforts so we didn't have to scroll through all nearly 90 questions that they have posted. So that still is a really great resource, a go-to for me, especially as we think about the tangled web when we have employees that might be out because of their own illness, caring for somebody else, or having to stay home and care for their child due to childcare issues and so forth. We have not seen the updated revised Form 941 yet. We're hopeful that in May we'll get some traction on that, so we at least have a good bit of time to prepare for having to file that at the end of June. If you're with a payroll provider, then they're going to make sure that their systems are updated accordingly. But if you still do process it in-house, then that's something you want to keep your eyes and ears open to, because there will definitely be changes as we have to reconcile the payroll tax credits, the employee retention credit, etc. So stay tuned for that. It is really important as we move forward to have a strong handle on the differences between the paid sick leave, the extended FMLA, as well as the PPP, and the interplay of which one comes first. How do I know what to pay employees, when to pay employees? So just always remember that the paid sick leave is the mandatory one, that all companies, no matter what size you are, you have to provide that. It is capped out at 80 hours, so that's the good news. And you get 100% of a return on that when you reduce your payroll tax liability or deposit, if you will, and that's what will be reconciled on the 941. So keep that in mind, because as you shift into maybe some of the reasons surrounding childcare and the extended FMLA, if your employee has the ability to telework, then you really have an opportunity to decide if you want to offer intermittent leave or not. Department of Labor firmly stands on saying, look, if the employer and employee agree to it, we'll support it. But it's not an obligation, and definitely if you are less than 50 employees, you could potentially claim a hardship from offering it at all in all circumstances. So it is a little bit tricky, and Mike Crescenzi might speak a little bit more about that. I just would encourage you to keep going back to the definitions, go back to the Department of Labor FAQs, and really pay attention to those scenarios that they describe and see how it applies to your situation at your organization. And if you're still puzzled, please don't hesitate to reach out, because I'm happy to help provide that clarity. And sometimes I trip up, but through collaborating, we definitely will be able to feel good with the approach that we use, because ultimately at the end of the day, we could be asked to provide support for those payroll tax credits. If you're a small company, 10 employees, the chances of being audited probably aren't too high. But you just never know. It takes one phone call by an employee. So we want to make sure that we give it the best good faith effort we can. If we trip up, that's okay. We ask for forgiveness. We say, sorry, this was our method for the way that we handled it. And logically, I think we can explain, especially when there's more than one of us coming to the same conclusion. So don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. It is definitely new for all of us. It's not going away because it's going to go through the end of the year. So please just do your best, document as much as you can, and together we will get through it. I promise you that. One thing that we do want to think forward to is the summer. So a lot of times our kids might go off to summer camp, right? Sometimes it might be for a week, church camp, or a specific sports camp. And in those circumstances, if that's canceled, it's not necessarily an item that would qualify under the extended FMLA for that child care provision. But in some cases, summer camp is the only child care that an individual might have, so they can continue to work every day. So in that case, if it's canceled and it is a summer-long program, I could definitely see where that would be a good reason for an employee who might need to take extended FMLA for childcare if they haven't exhausted it already here in the spring with the closing of school. So just something that came up a couple times in conversation this week, and I wanted to share that with you because you too might bump into that with one or more of your employees. So that's all that I have for regulatory types of updates for you. Certainly if something new comes up pressing, I'll let you know before next week, but otherwise you'll see me again next week just sharing insight about, what are the scenarios that clients are coming forth with and that we're talking through that might be helpful and insightful to you. So let's go ahead and do another poll question. We like picking your brain here and just giving an opportunity for all participants to see where are my peers, where are other companies struggling or knocking it out of the ballpark, if you will. So as you think about your people, your employees, how prepared do you feel to reopen? Are you very prepared? You're ready to rock and roll? You could open the door tomorrow and not miss a beat. Are you feeling a little bit uneasy? Not quite sure? Think you're doing all the right things but still worried? Or are you completely unprepared and just not sure how to go forward? So once we get a good response, we'll go ahead and launch those and see where everybody's at. And this topic does tie into Mike's conversation and a few other topics at the roundtable. So, wow, there's a lot of people in good shape. I'm excited for you. Somewhat prepared. Yeah, I think you'll just continue to work at it and you'll get better with each day. Hopefully a few things that you take away from today will help you, get you feeling more prepared. And then those that are not prepared at all, don't be afraid to reach out. You don't have to be the expert. And I'm not saying it's me that you reach out to. Reach out to those people that you strategically partner with for other business decisions. I'm happy if you want to reach out to me or anybody here on our call today. But yeah, please don't feel too embarrassed. No question is silly because, again, we're all going through this together. So thank you so much for your participation. We greatly appreciate it. And we are keeping right on track with timing. I'm so excited. Our hope was to wrap up this portion of the session today by 2:45, and we're falling right in line with that. So I am really excited for the next two people who are going to share some insight with you. I'm going to first ask Rick to join me here on the screen. Rick is going to share a few thoughts about trends and the future and just thinking differently now that we're facing a new normal. So Rick, if you'll share some thoughts, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristi. I think as those people that have participated the last couple of weeks in the town hall meeting, you've heard our panel, Chad and the rest of the team, talking about the regulations. And as we all know, regulations are going to be with us forever. And unfortunately, because these regulations were coming out, we found ourselves in a reactive position, having to react. You would see Tom and Chad looking off their shoulder, looking for the latest release from Congress or from the SBA. So when we identified that situation as being a reactive and almost an agile position, it was almost 2 years ago that Stambaugh Ness embarked on a completely new initiative. And I shared this with the group before. It was called a book that we all read and have really incorporated the philosophies and the methodologies in it. The title of the book is The Anticipatory Organization, written by Daniel Burris, a well-known futurist, speaker, and presenter. And in the book and a lot of his blogs, he has coined a term of future view, which really promotes an organization to identify trends and then the ability to anticipate what's to come as a disruptor. And if you can do that, and if you can identify those disruptors, hopefully you can pre-solve those or address them before they happen. a good example of that is companies that had excellent remote or virtual workforce policies and procedures in place before we all of a sudden found out that we were having to shut down our offices and everybody was going to virtual, this was like turning a switch. And fortunately, Stambaugh Ness, even prior to this, over 65% of our people were virtual remote, and it was a very easy transition. But just wanted to share, and I've shared this with you in the past, that a recent quote that Burroughs, particularly as it related here during the time of the pandemic, he said, "A future view is very circular in that it not only defines how you see the days to come, but it influences everything you see and do right now." So if your post-pandemic future view is bleak, then your actions will reflect that sentiment. But if it is anticipatory and positive, tomorrow's going to look bright, even in these dark times. And we talk about trends, and folks, this pandemic, it's a soft trend. It's going to change. We're going to change that. So when we move from the reactive and the agile, dealing with the regulations coming out, we've shifted to a mindset and the goal to share with the people on the webinar a proactive approach, focusing on those things that you can do and looking at those things that you can leverage certainty so that you can actively shape a better future for yourself and the business. I can't tell you how many conversations and discussions I have been a part of where people would say, "Boy, I can't do this. I can't do that." And I said, just stop it. We've got to focus on those things that we can do. Look at those things with certainty. So it was with that spirit that we developed this panel discussion. Last week, I think those were involved. We had identified the facilities, and we had Chris Baker from Hillman Consulting talking to those on the webinar. What things must you be doing? What things can you do right now as you look to the re-entry back to the new norm? We've got to identify those issues, those items. So we talked about facilities. Today we're going to talk about personnel, and in a moment, Kristi's going to introduce you to a guest speaker that we're going to be having talking about what are some of those issues? What are those things we may face so we can identify them and try to pre-solve them before they happen? So we're going to talk about personnel this week. Again, we're going to touch on finance areas. Phil Keeney is going to weigh in a little bit on the technology, and then also, if time permits, may touch on just some of the general operational things. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kristi. The key is, what can you be doing? Be anticipatory. Identify those things that with certainty that you can accomplish. With that, Kristi, hand off to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm really excited to introduce the next person here today. So Mike, as I go over your biography a little bit, can you get yourself positioned from a voice and a video perspective and join me on the screen here? So Mike and I have worked together for multiple years now. We have been a part of the Society of Human Resource Management. He's a significant resource that we lean on, especially when we have challenges with our workforce. So Mike has a lot of experience, fortunately or unfortunately, as you think about the EEOC, the Fair Labor Standards Act, American Disabilities Act, Family Medical Leave Act. So there's a lot of things at play here that he has a ton of experience. And I do expect that as we move forward, we might be in a position where we have some dynamics that cause us to have to either respond to an outside agency or just take those preventative measures to try to avoid getting a knock on our door, if you will. So Mike is with Farley Snyder for many years, and Mike, feel free to give a little bit more of your background. He's going to share about 10 minutes with us, and he is going to tell us, what are the things that we might not be thinking about from a workforce perspective as we bring them back to work, start opening our facilities again, and so forth. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Kristi. Thank you, Rick. Very much appreciate being part of this panel today. Thank you, Stambaugh Ness, for inviting me, and look forward to the roundtable and the Q&A later on. As Kristi said, I'm a lawyer with Farley Snyder. I've been practicing employment law for more than 25 years now. And our group at Barley Snyder has been actively involved in answering many, many questions from our clients the last month, 5 weeks. And the questions have shifted. Certainly at the beginning, we had many questions about what to do with layoffs and how to handle it, and furloughs and severance agreements. Then we were turning to how we deal with all of the new laws coming out and the regulations that seem to be hitting us every other day. And lately, which is great in terms of the topic today for this town hall, we've been getting a lot of questions about, well, what do we do now? What do we do with bringing people back? What are some of the concerns? What do we need to look out for? What I am hearing most of all right now is, what do we do about worker safety? We are getting a number of questions and concerns from employees who are either currently working at an essential business or realizing that they need to come back to work soon as the local governments and state governments start to open up more and more businesses. One of the major aspects of worker safety, as many of you know, is OSHA. They're a federal agency in charge of protecting the workplace and making sure it's safe, and it's got numerous regulations. But believe it or not, there are no current regulations pertaining to this pandemic. OSHA has been relatively quiet during this pandemic. You may have seen news accounts that many unions are upset with OSHA, that they are not taking a more active stance with either issuing regulations or doing investigations. For the most part, at least locally here in Pennsylvania, OSHA, recognizing that its workforce has been depleted because of the COVID-19 crisis and not wanting to expose their own workers to possible exposure to the virus, has really stepped back in terms of its on-site investigations. They are certainly responding to complaints from workers and are typically sending letters to the employers asking them to investigate the matter and report back to OSHA on the complaint. OSHA has what's called a general duty clause for all employers, and that says that you as an employer are in charge of making sure that the workplace is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. You may have seen in the news that some employers are being sued by employees or groups of employees because they believe they contracted the virus while working. And in those lawsuits, the employees are claiming that the employer was negligent and did not comply with this general duty clause in the OSHA regulations. That is one aspect to it, but the other aspect that goes into it is workers' compensation. So again, we get questions from employers, well, what liability do I have to my workers? I'm doing the best I can to keep them safe, but I am concerned that if I have people who don't feel safe or are disgruntled about certain safety measures we are putting in place, that they may sue us if they believe they contract the virus while working. Workers' compensation is basically a state-driven type of law. There is no federal workers' comp that covers this aspect. Federal workers' comp is only for federal employees. So you got to look to each state in the way those laws are drafted and also how they are interpreted. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have a clause in our Workers' Compensation Act that says that workers' compensation is the exclusive remedy for employees, meaning that the employee cannot sue the employer for general negligence. And what we see in these cases, what you may see in the news is that employees are claiming that the employer intentionally disregarded the CDC guidelines or the state guidelines on trying to keep employees safe. You may have heard even stories from the Midwest where certain meat packing companies were allegedly not complying with various regulations to keep workers safe, and that the workers have sued those particular plants. Again, don't be worried too much about what you see in the news, because those lawsuits are state-driven and are based on state laws. You need to be concerned with the state where you are located and those laws that apply to you. So I believe workers' compensation will provide some measure of comfort to those employers that are very concerned about getting sued by their employees. Of course, if you have workers' compensation, your workers' compensation carrier will take up the defense for any claim for workers' compensation benefits. So a couple other things that we've been hearing about would be unemployment compensation. People are still receiving it. People are still out of work. Each state, again, drives what the unemployment compensation system will look like. Many states do provide a partial unemployment compensation benefit, like Pennsylvania. You may have heard about the enhanced unemployment compensation. The federal government has interpreted the CARES Act to mean that if a person is receiving any benefit, even a partial benefit in that state, they are entitled to receive the full $600. That $600 is not means tested, meaning it's not reduced by the amount of earnings a person may have if they are on a reduced schedule. And this is important because I'm anticipating that as businesses open, they're not going to be back full time because the demand will not be there, or the government restricts the amount of customers that can come into the store or restaurant. And that might mean that you only pay part-time for basically your full-time workers. And that's just going to be the reality for a while. In that case, at least in the states that pay a partial unemployment compensation benefit, your workers will obtain the partial benefit if they are on a reduced schedule and reduced pay, but they're also going to receive that extra $600 until at least the end of July of 2020. I'm anticipating, given what I'm seeing in the news, that if we're still in this situation by the end of July, I wouldn't be surprised if Congress doesn't extend that $600 for a period longer than the end of July. A couple other things I'd like to go over with the EEOC that Kristi mentioned. The EEOC has interpreted the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of this crisis, and they have allowed employers to do temperature checks on employees as they come into the plant or to the work location. You can ask questions of your employees as they come in. How are they feeling? To go through the symptoms that the CDC has indicated are consistent with COVID-19. If anybody has symptoms, you're allowed to send them home. And just recently, the EEOC indicated that as a part of the post-employment offer, you can have the employees tested for COVID-19. The EEOC has said that the test needs to be reliable and safe, and I still believe the entrepreneurial spirit is still alive in this country, and I'm anticipating that there will be a number of companies that will offer this service to employers so that if they want to have employees tested, they can have that done safely and reliably. Of course, we've heard in the news that we continue to struggle as a country to get a sufficient number of tests out there, but that continues to improve, and I think we're going to continue to see that improve to a point where employers will be able to get their hands on those tests or have companies come in and do that testing for the employees. We've heard some movement now from businesses that they're making claims for business interruption on their general liability insurances. That is a typical rider or part of a liability insurance package that many employers have. I will warn you, however, that the insurance companies are pushing back on business interruption insurance claims. Most of the claims are written so that the employer needs to prove that there was some physical harm to the premises, and that's somewhat difficult to do in this COVID-19 crisis. However, there are a number of businesses and law firms that are pushing ahead with these claims. Again, it depends on the language of the insurance policy. If you have such a policy, I ask that you would check with your agent first and your counsel to determine if it's a viable claim to make or not. I've seen on the news even this week that the insurance industry is very concerned about these claims and has basically said that if these claims go through and they're forced to pay them, that it will bankrupt many of the insurance companies in this country. There is even talk at Congress to limit liability of employers, as I mentioned earlier, for any claims by workers for contracting the virus while at work. And I think that might even extend to some of this bailout or business interruption insurance to provide some protection probably to the insurance companies. So we'll wait and see what Congress does with that. But that is a viable option for some employers, depending on how the policy is written and, frankly, the jurisdiction you're in and how the states have interpreted those provisions over the years. As some of the speakers mentioned earlier, as part of the PPP, you may be paying hazard pay or bonuses. Just keep in mind, if you do pay a bonus, that is counted in terms of any overtime pay. So you need to apportion that bonus, especially if it's a one-time bonus, over the hours accrued or worked during that bonus period. And that's how you have to calculate the overtime. So don't forget to do that. In the hustle and bustle of trying to get your business open and comply with the PPP, the Fair Labor Standards Act still applies, and make sure you calculate overtime in the right way. Kristi mentioned the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and the emergency FMLA, emergency sick leave. We haven't seen as many claims for that as we anticipated. It could be because people are not back to work. Many are still receiving unemployment comp as you look at the unemployment comp claims. But for those essential workers that are still out there working, employers either are paying them, maybe they're paying them now under this PPP loan program, so they're getting their full wage or close to their full wage, and they don't see the need to declare that benefit. But it's still a benefit, as Kristi mentioned, that we're going to be living with until the end of the year, if not longer. And as Kristi again mentioned, pay attention to the regulations. They have been excellent in terms of outlining how to calculate the benefit, when to pay it. I will mention that New York State has already filed a lawsuit challenging the certain portions of the regulations. They didn't like how the intermittent FMLA was interpreted by the Department of Labor, and they also did not like the way the regulations defined healthcare worker. So once again, just need to be careful and keep abreast of how things are developing day by day, week by week in this climate. Thanks, Kristi. That's all I have to share today about some hot topics with employment issues as we get ready to open more businesses across the country.
Great. So as we're waiting for all the rest of the town hall participants, the roundtable discussion speakers to join us here, Mike, I want to first say thank you so much. We appreciate you committing time to spend with us this afternoon. There was a question that came in that I'll have you speak to with me while everybody's joining us. But when an employee refuses to come back to work, history has shown that unemployment would say, look, if you're not making yourself ready and available to work, you disqualify yourself essentially for unemployment benefits. Do you know if there will be any consideration to change that? Because I know personally I've been telling clients to lean on that, like, look, if they're not going to come in, then you can't be charged on your unemployment account for, their unemployment if it's awarded and so forth. So have you heard anything, or are we going to just stay firm on if employees aren't ready and able, they're not going to get unemployment any longer?
It depends on why they're out. If it's a generalized fear of coming back to work and possibly contracting the virus, that is not enough to obtain unemployment compensation benefits in Pennsylvania. If they have been advised by a healthcare provider that they need to self-quarantine because maybe they're in a high-risk group because of underlying health problems, then yes, that would qualify for unemployment compensation. If an employer even says, I really don't want you coming back, maybe the person has some symptoms of COVID-19, but has not yet tested positive for it, that would also qualify for unemployment compensation in Pennsylvania. Where I'm hearing difficulty from the employer standpoint is they're now ready to have people come back to work. They're ramping up operations, and they're getting pushback from some people who have been off and saying, I just don't feel comfortable coming back. That is not enough for unemployment compensation, and it really puts a difficult communication issue between the employer and the employee. How much does the employer want to push that? Can they terminate the employee for refusing to come back to work? Yes, that's possible, but do you want to do that now? What kind of signal does that send to the rest of the workforce? So you and Katie might have some HR techniques to handle that situation. But from a legal aspect, an employer has certainly a right in that situation to say, I'm sorry, we got work for you. If you don't want to come back because of some generalized fear, we're going to let you go and bring somebody else in to take your place. At that point, they could jeopardize their receipt of unemployment compensation. What you don't want to have happen is, unfortunately, some people might get used to collecting unemployment comp plus $600, which may even exceed their take-home pay. And so they're really giving pushback to employers about coming back to work.
Yeah, we've heard that echoed already. Katie, that kind of tees you up. Is there anything additional that you would like to share along that vein with bringing employees back and some of the things that we should be considering?
Absolutely. Some of the things that Mike had shared really resonated with me, and I think at the end of the day, if I were in your shoes, the people who are attending this, I would say I would start with the compensation plan. I would want to make sure that you're explaining to your employees that you are creating a safe workplace for them. And whatever that means in your world, whatever that looks like for you as an industry and as a company. So maybe going into more detail about the sort of PPE equipment. There's way too many acronyms today. But that way, they can, again, get an idea. Okay, so they're putting these steps in place. Mike talked a little bit about taking temperature. I know for us, we are looking at an infrared temperature reading. So then that way we feel that we have a device where we can demonstrate we're taking those precautions. Another thing to think about, depending upon how your organization is designed and the outlay of the building, where will you take that temperature? Think about the fact that if you do that in front of other people, the rumor mill will start. Oh my goodness, John has a temperature of 102. I can't believe they let him come in. It kind of goes from there. But as Mike said, there might be a service out there where you can hire somebody to come in, and then you're not relying or putting somebody in a position to take someone's temperature. So that would be something that you would want to consider to communicate about. Also, think about delivery services. Is that something where you want to ramp up delivery services and start building those relationships now as you're starting to decide when will these people come back? And then if, Mike did a really good job talking about employees resisting to come back. I really think about what Mike had said there. And remember, this is recorded, so you'll have a chance to go back and listen to what he said, because we're always bringing you tons of information. Know that you can play that back and you'll be able to listen to it. And at the end of the day, I try to take this on a positive light. Keep in mind that communication yields engagement. The more transparent we are, people will feel like they can trust and they know that you are putting their safety in mind. Accountability comes from expectations. So if people know what's expected of them, you have a more engagement with your employees. And then lastly, if you if I could talk individualize, you can optimize. So think about the folks that are coming back and again, anticipate, who would be a little nervous about coming back, get in front of it and reach out to them ahead of time. And Kristi, I was just curious with all the things I've mentioned, Are there some situations where obviously you keep things confidential, but maybe you could speak to some of those points?
Yeah, there's definitely fear, and a lot of what Mike and Katie already shared. I don't have much to add other than that I'm seeing it with the companies coming forward with the questions. It's definitely real. These are the things that companies are considering or just trying to navigate. It is so delicate. So again, reach out if any of you are struggling, because I'm sure we can at least try to relate it to a similar experience that maybe another company is going through and just help you navigate in the best way possible through all this confusion, if you will. So Darren, I'm going to ask you to speak next, although I see that you dropped from the video. Are you still with us, Darren?
I am here.
Okay. Well, your video disconnected if you want to try to come back up.
Yeah, it's spinning, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. So Mike had talked about, insurance, business interruption insurance and so forth. And I know in some of our recent conversations, we were thinking about like self-insured health plans and business lenders and so forth. So what other information can you share specifically as you think about monitoring your cash flow and so forth? What other tips do you have in your tool belt you could share with us?
Sure. So yeah, I guess when I think about this subject, I've been reflecting on a lot of the topics that we've been discussing the last few weeks. And, we've focused on improving transparency of cash flow by preparing and updating forecasts. And today I thought I'd take a few minutes to talk about some things that we can do to preserve and protect our cash flow. And I would call these best practices in any business climate, but I think they're especially important now and easy to ignore when times are good. And so if there's a general topic I would put this under, I would call it enterprise risk management. And if you understand anything about enterprise risk management, that's a very broad topic and we could spend all day talking about it. But if you really break it down to the primary concept and the frameworks, it basically consists of a few steps. And it starts with establishing context. And what that means is just understanding the conditions in which the organization is operating under, both internally and externally. And then once you kind of understand the situation, which obviously we're dealing with circumstances right now that are, I guess, unprecedented, then you start to define what your objectives are. And those can be revenue objectives, cost objectives, profitability objectives, and cash flow objectives. Those are just some examples. So then once you've defined your objectives, you want to identify risks and threats to achieving those objectives, assessing and prioritizing the risks, and then responding to the risks. I wanted to relate some of the specific topics we've talked about in prior town hall meetings to this framework. And one of, the first thing that I'll speak to, I guess, is, Kristi, what you just mentioned and what Mike has talked about, and that's one of the common responses to risk is insurance, right? And so I don't have a whole lot to add to what Mike already discussed. I think he did a nice job of touching on the business interruption, the various forms of insurance, whether it's workers' compensation, how it applies, some of the things to think about, and what we might need to anticipate in terms of claims against some of those policies. The only other thing I would add, and Kristi, I guess you alluded to this, is the fact that we are seeing, there are companies out there that have self-insurance. And typically that can be, related to both health insurance and sometimes workers' comp insurance. And so we're starting to see those companies begin to develop models to anticipate what the financial impact might be as they start to see claims coming in against their self-insured programs for, either health insurance or workers' compensation insurance. So, across the board, I think it's a good idea to take a look at that and start to determine and understand what the impact could be. So that's one area I wanted to talk about, and then two others. We've talked a lot in previous town halls about just paying attention to your customers and monitoring collections with your customers from a cash flow standpoint. We also, want to think about this in the context of the fact that companies are starting to pivot to new products and markets and could be introducing risks with new customers. And obviously there's emerging risks with existing customers under the current situation. So, something, again, in the vein of enterprise risk management, something to keep in mind is, in addition to diligently monitoring your collection metrics like aged receivables and days sales outstanding, I think we also want to start thinking about taking precautionary and preventive steps to evaluate our customers, existing and new, to make sure that, we're understanding the credit risk that they pose to the company. So, there are due diligence procedures that you can put in place, doing credit checks and things of that nature with your customers to start to evaluate the credit risk. And then once you have an understanding of that, then start to take a look at or consider establishing some credit limits for certain customers, depending on the risk that they pose to your organization. And then beyond that, take a look at your collection practices. We've said before, maintain lines of communication with your customers. Maybe most importantly, make sure your communications are getting through to the proper individuals in the company. I think just communication breakdown sometimes is one of the biggest issues with collection procedures. Take a look at, how you're handling disputes. So if a customer has a dispute with something, consider how you're addressing that to make sure it's not holding up an entire invoice. So maybe find a way to segregate the dispute from, the overall invoice. And then the last area I wanted to just touch on was vendor management. Again, we've talked a lot about supply chain and evaluating that. There are best practices to manage your vendors and your supply chain. Again, from a risk management perspective, just you want to think about establishing a process to evaluate those risks. Start by prioritizing the highest potential impact, the vendors that could have the highest potential impact to your company and your operations. Obviously, carefully review any contracts you have. Evaluate viability of the vendors, both operationally and financially, and then consider other factors like information security measures, qualifications, what are their business continuity plans, and I would just want to emphasize, treat this as a show and tell. So in other words, you can ask questions and they will tell you what they're doing, but it's best to also ask them to show you. You want to see evidence of some of these things, like their business continuity plans, their qualifications, things of that nature. So those are just, again, just to kind of summarize that was just thinking about all of this from the standpoint and the context of enterprise risk management.
Okay, thank you, Darren. It's interesting as I hear you talking about risk and planning and so forth. We've heard, I think, both sides. We've heard where economists say we're going to sharply increase, get back to normal, and, as far as business volume and really see us rebounding quickly. But then you have some others who are more conservative saying, I'm not sure that it's going to be as quick for us to rebound, that we may not see economically, the positives until 2021. So it's definitely something that we should play through both ways with our businesses. If we have a sharp uptick in business and things are humming along, or if it's a little bit slower. So just wanted to add that a little bit. Phil, I'm going to call upon you next. So as you think forward 60 to 90 days, where do you see technology taking us?
Well, I think over the past few weeks, I've primarily spoken to technology at a macro level. What I mean by that is what you can do on a day-to-day basis to secure your infrastructure, to set up the remote workers, to accommodate their needs. And it was really at the micro level, but we also need to be looking at the macro level as well. And if you look back through history, you will see that every major crisis had a fundamental social and economic shift that lasted for generations. And just at a small scale, when you think about, the other day I'm out running, and the sidewalk's 6 feet, at least the minimum is 6 feet apart. And the person that I was coming up on, they actually went across the road to the other side of the road to get away from me. I get social distancing in the 6-foot ordeal, but even down to if you're out in public a month, 2 months from now, and you sneeze or cough, there's going to be impact there. People are going to remember this day. So what we have to look at too is at the macro level, supply chain has seen a significant disruption. I have clients reaching out. I had a handful of them just again this week, and it's every single week. I have clients reaching out, hey, I need webcams because we have more people going remote. I need laptops. I need this and that. And I'm telling them flat out, I'm like, look, if you need this stuff, order it now because it may not arrive to your doorstep in another 30 to 45 days, if not longer. Supply chains are disrupted. Even when you look at ordering online on Amazon, the Amazon Prime, the days of next day shipping or 2-day shipping, it doesn't happen anymore. Their stuff is pushed out and they're prioritizing. So, if a business, from a technology perspective, if a business is running mission critical applications within their enterprise and they're running on hardware, and if that hardware fails, a lot of organizations at the enterprise level, they have service level agreements with whether it be Dell, HP, IBM, any of their providers. They have service level agreements of mission critical products. What that means is if their infrastructure goes down, they will drop ship a new piece of hardware within 4 hours or next day. I can guarantee you those SLA times will no longer stand. So you need to be positioning yourself that if an application goes down that's critical to your infrastructure, it is going to take much longer for that distributor to get you your new hard drive or new switch, firewall, whatever it may be. So plan for downtime. It's going to be costly. Business owners also need to make sure, and I always think about the IT team. IT teams are used to, for the most part, dealing with on-prem environments. Now, when people go remote, it's a whole other level of security that you have to be thinking about, just like Darren had mentioned there, the risk side of it. You have to understand your risk and what protocols and processes you have to put in place in order to secure your data. And business owners need to make sure that their IT teams know how to effectively leverage cloud technologies and understand how to spin them up in the event that their mission critical on-prem environments go down. If that environment goes down, you could call up Dell for hardware, for a hard drive, etc. They can't get it to you for another 3-4 days. What are you going to do in the interim? You've got to understand how to leverage cloud technology, spin up a server, utilize it until you get your new part in, then figure out where to go from there. Some people like Kristi had mentioned, economists say, hey, 2021, the economy should be back up and running, things close to a sense of normalcy. I would maybe beg to differ based upon the reading that I'm going through. Just again, going back to the supply chain piece of this, we can't keep up. And, it could be 9 months, a year, or longer before we even see the turnaround times that we're used to seeing as it relates to technology. And to be honest with you, as I was reading some articles this week that Darren had sent over, we have become so reliant on offshore supplies that now we're seeing the downside of decades of offshoring. And this is specifically speaking to the manufacturing sector. What does that mean for U.S.-based businesses? Going back to Rick's comments earlier, being anticipatory, looking forward. A lot of this stuff that we see now in legislation, it's in the now, trying to figure out what's changing and how to adapt to it. But as all that stuff's going on, think about how you're going to move forward in the future. What does that look like? I look at it as an opportunity in the manufacturing side for the revival of domestic manufacturing, retooling, using automation. And another thing too, increasing the use of 3D printing. There's so many things out there that, you know, I talk to in the manufacturing side where they're waiting on parts. Well, guess what? Parts may be shipped from China. And instead of a week turnaround time, it's 3 to 4 weeks. Well, if they had 3D printing capabilities, would it allow them to turn that around much faster? Probably. So businesses are looking to leverage cloud technologies to assist in making that virtual shift. I was reading too in 2017, The Economist announced that data has become the world's most valuable resource. And if you take a step back and think about that, Stambaugh Ness, Barley Snyder, any of those. If you don't have access to client files, if you don't have access to data, what are you doing? You're done. I mean, you can't operate to a certain extent. So data is becoming the most valuable resource. Well, it is the most valuable resource. And due to COVID-19, the crisis here has definitely pushed businesses to view data as an even more strategic resource for their business. And one thing that I'll comment here, when you take a look at the data side of this, the more your data grows, the more you have to be spending on securing it, creating that business continuity plan. Make sure that you're securing the data, securing your IP. People don't understand it. They think, hey, you know what? I'm just going to continue business as usual. I'm going to spend on it, whether it be on the manufacturing floor, I'm going to spend the money on the hardware, the items, the machinery that makes me money. Not really concerned about the back end of the business, the infrastructure side, or even in the engineering, AEC space. Some of the focus may be, hey, I'm going to spend more money on the design side because that's the side that the engineers and project managers are, they're in whether it be Autodesk, Revit, Bentley software, that's what's making us money. But they have to think about on the back side, the IT infrastructure. How are they securing that data? Where is it traveling to? And these organizations need to increase their spend going forward in cybersecurity. And of course, with the shift to cloud, the faster, everybody wants their information now. Just like when I order something off of Amazon, if I'm paying for Amazon Prime, I want it next day. I want it 2 days. Now I'm waiting 5, 6 days for something to get ordered. We've lived in a state of give it to me now. And as we look at people moving to the cloud now, more of a shift to cloud products, SaaS products, there's going to become a need, and it's already here, for faster, more bandwidth. And it's an opportunity for organizations to start truly evaluating the 5G network deployment, the adoption of 5G equipment. How's that going to impact them? So organizations need to be thinking about the future of this, not everything in the now, but how they can capitalize on technology, using technology to continue to move their business forward. And, those organizations that they may be competing with, if they're not embracing this change, they will fall behind. And that's all. That's my, maybe a rant there a little bit, but I'm telling you, the stuff that I'm seeing here, Darren, the information you sent over the other day in the manufacturing realm, there is so much good stuff out there that these organizations, we need to be looking at this as an opportunity to come out on top and embrace the change. Because just like I mentioned with golfing and running, there's going to be weird social things that are going to happen down the road as well that we may not see now.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. And it is interesting how Amazon, has changed our expectation as to delivery time, same-day delivery and so forth. And now that's been disrupted. So it will be interesting to see how we move away from this and what that looks like going forward. So before we turn it over to Q&A, I really want to try to allow 35 minutes or so for Q&A. I would like to pick your brain, Rick, on what are some of the other trends that you're hearing, seeing that maybe we haven't touched on yet that people should give some thought to? You're on mute. Rick, you're on mute. You might have to go up to your icon at the top. Kaylee muted us all.
Okay, thank you. I was hoping that I tried to capture the essence of some of that, my opening comments, that I think what we've seen is everybody was just so pumped up coming into this. Things were going well, opportunities, and now this thing hit, and we've kind of fallen into a little bit of a phase of stagnation that people are saying, they're looking in the rearview mirror saying, what it was like, and they're not taking enough time to look out the windshield and really focus on what the future is going to be. We hear this phrase, the new norm. And I think that's the key thing is we need to really, as we've been trying to identify these things, stop, reflect, and anticipate what's going to change, how's my business going to be impacted, and start to identify how you can address that. Many, many firms are taking this time of sequester, quarantine, to really reflect on how they're going to be operating. I was on a panel call yesterday with firms across the United States, and they're looking at, they've got leases that are about to expire, and they're rethinking, prior to this, they were thinking about adding square footage. Now they're thinking about reducing square footage. So there's some things that are going to be dynamics here that we really got to be thinking about, just change the whole way we approach and do business. And, when you think about higher education, I can't imagine what that's going to be looking like on a go-forward basis. You already had a lot of virtual higher ed. The days of bricks and mortar, that's going to change. So to sit here and think about what it was like and expend your efforts and energy there, not well spent. You got to be sitting there thinking about how's this going to impact me? How can I innovate? How can I be, creative and anticipatory and identify those issues? So it's a time of opportunity, as Phil said. It is a time of opportunity. And Burris has said this, and I know I've quoted him a number of times. The pandemic, the coronavirus, is not the problem, folks. It's how we react to it and how we plan for the future. And that's what you really got to be focused on. Thanks, Kristi.
Yeah. So while we're getting Tom queued back up here to take us home to the Q&A session, we're going to have Kaylee launch our final poll question for us. And it relates to facilities. Okay. So from a facility standpoint, how prepared do you feel you are to reopen? Very prepared, feeling okay, but just have some concerns yet, or not prepared at all? If you could please give us a response, we'll share that with everyone. And I know some of you may be wondering, what about the question and answers if we don't get to all of them? We've been doing a really good job of handling those after the town hall and then sending those out to all participants. So if we don't get to all your questions, or if you're interested in seeing responses for somebody else's questions, you absolutely will be able to see that. Kaylee, you want to launch it? All right, there we are. So a lot of you are feeling really good. Not too many are feeling completely unprepared, so that's good news. Glad to see that. All right, Tom, are you ready to take us home with our Q&As and round out the session?
Yeah, I think maybe we need to take the poll off of there, and then we'll...
Yeah, I see everybody's pause.
There we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Certainly a lot of great information, again, from the group this week, and we hope everyone's really enjoying these roundtable discussions. I think they really give us a great perspective on what to look forward to as we move into this next stage and try to get back to as normal as we can. So with that, Kelly, if you would give us some questions. I know a lot of the questions, people have been doing a good job of answering them as we go along, but we certainly would be excited to share a couple of those with the group. So Kelly, what do you have?
Alrighty, thank you for that, Tom. And as he mentioned, please insert your questions into the question and answer panel, as we only have a few to go through here, and we do have some time left in the hour. So this question is going to be for you, Chad. It's about the $10,000 EIDL grants as it relates to round 2 of the PPP funding. Can you elaborate more on that?
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, one thing I did want to clarify earlier, and I failed to mention, so the EIDL funding was also replenished with the round 2 PPP funding earlier in the week that kicked off. There was up to a $10,000 grant through the EIDL program that's based on $1,000 per employee, and that has again been replenished. So if you haven't looked into that opportunity and it's something that you're interested in, I believe you're still going to the SBA.gov website to apply for that grant. And also the EIDL loans that are non-forgivable, they also now have the bandwidth to make some more loans under that program if you either don't qualify for the PPP or it doesn't necessarily meet your needs.
Perfect. And there's another question here about businesses owned by private companies with adequate sources of liquidity. Could you elaborate on that as well?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to my earlier comments in terms of, the need. A lot of these are subjective in terms of what adequate liquidity and capacity is. But what was interesting is, as we were chatting here this afternoon, I did look at the FAQ, and there was another FAQ added from the Treasury, and it hit about businesses owned by private companies with adequate sources of liquidity, and they pointed back to the response to question 31 I mentioned earlier, that basically, while you're not required to look at your existing loan, you should consider those in determining your need. So, the final guidance and what they really mean by that, what does adequate mean, and what's a large company, and all those things are pretty subjective. But it does seem more and more that the Treasury is starting to hone in on how they're going to interpret that need. And it seems like it's going to be the same for public and private companies based on that question that just got answered this afternoon on their FAQ.
Thank you, Chad. And this question may have been covered earlier. It could be a Kristi question. It could be a Mike question. So if an employee refuses to come back to work due to fear, can they lose unemployment benefits?
They could if they don't qualify under one of the reasons that Mike had outlined, as far as if they're sick themselves or have been ordered to stay home. Mike, anything else you want to add? You're on mute. Mike, you're on mute. It might be your icon. Check at the sidebar there.
Oh, there. I did it on my phone, but I had to do it on the computer. There I am. Thank you.
You're good.
Yes, you're right, Kristi. Unless they fall into one of the eligibility criteria under the FFCRA or the other eligibility that the Pennsylvania Unemployment Comp Bureau has indicated, they're not going to be able to get it. Yeah.
So, Mike, I did see another question come in related to this and wanted to pick your brain. So from the child care perspective, let's say they've exhausted their time maybe over the school year and now summer camp. Do you think that would be reason that they'd be able to claim unemployment?
Give me a scenario, Kristi, where you see that happening.
So if an employee exhausted all of their extended FMLA that they're eligible for, the 10 weeks, and now they can't continue to work through the summer, they still don't have child care because summer camps are closed, do you see that unemployment would allow them to collect?
According to the Pennsylvania Unemployment Compensation website, that is still an uncertain question on how that would work, because we're not sure if they're going to extend the eligibility beyond the normal school year for either private or public schools that typically end first part of June. I think we're going to have to wait and see for some further guidance from the Unemployment Comp Bureau on how they want to handle that. But
if you're a person that wants to qualify for unemployment for that reason, I would be cautious about whether you're going to get it in that circumstance.
Yeah. Okay. Kaylee, back to you.
All right. This next question is labeled for Darren. Is there a cost-effective way to check our client's credit?
There's different services out there. I know the most common, I think, is D&B. I also know occasionally where with my clients, there are times where their customers request financial information from them. Personally, I usually recommend that they provide enough information but limited. So there are certain ratios out there, in particular financial ratios that can be provided that give you a good understand or a good measurement point of the general financial health of a company. One in particular is called an Altman Z-score. So that's probably that would be one of my recommendations, is to request limited financial information if customers are willing to provide it.
Thank you, Darren. And this next one's going to be for either Kristi or Katie. When we reopen our office, will we need to provide face masks to all employees? Are they required to wear them within the office, even if their seats are more than 6 feet apart?
Katie, do you want that one?
Well, I guess it depends upon where you live. I know that Governor Wolf was talking about the masks, and I know that it's a good practice to make sure that there is at least 6 feet in distance with coworkers. So that might be something that you might want to think about as you do your final walkthrough before you open your doors for your employees to return, is thinking about that. I'm sure there's going to be some places where you might forget, but it is definitely important to have that as a good practice.
Thank you, Katie.
I think if I could respond, Katie's exactly right. It depends on your state and your locality. It changes all the time as we move forward with this on what the requirements are, and it depends sometimes on the industry. We just saw Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania put out the guidance on reopening construction work in Pennsylvania, and he gave guidance on what you can and cannot do as an employer in terms of protecting your employees. So it's a moving target and a moving standard, and one you just need to keep on top of the websites and the news and make sure that you're complying with all the requirements of the government. That's also going to protect you, as I mentioned earlier, about liability issues. If you know what those standards are from the Department of Health and the CDC, you can put them into practice and make sure you communicate, as Katie said, communicate exactly what you're doing in terms of keeping people safe, so they have the expectation you're looking out for them.
Thanks, Chad. And this next question is actually going to go to you, so you can stay on the line. It says, I haven't seen anything on PPP loan forgiveness for the employer contributions to HSA. Is there any news on that?
Thanks, Kelly. My understanding is the employer contributions to HSA, I haven't seen those be allowable. They're neither, health insurance or compensation, but that's a great point in terms of just something that there's some questions on if they're going to be allowable or not. My suggestion there is stay tuned until we see the final guidance, and they may allow those HSA contributions from the employer to be included, but right now I've not seen that.
Okay. And Kristi, this next one's for you. If you are putting employees back on payroll in order to use the funds for PPP to get forgiveness and your business is still closed, can you force them to go back on payroll if they do not want to because they are making more on unemployment due to the additional $600 federal payment?
I'll respond, but I think Mike also might have some thoughts on that by his smile. So when an employee files a claim for unemployment, they have to indicate if they have received any other type of wages during that week. So if a company is giving them pay, they need to self-claim that when they're filing unemployment, which again, it could disqualify them from receiving anything for that week if the earnings are so high that they meet the threshold. And if an employee is dishonest, there will be a reconciliation of that at some point, which could then jeopardize the employee from getting unemployment going forward for a short-term period or longer. Mike, do you have any other thoughts that you want to share on that?
No, that's exactly right. There is a form that employers can file with the Unemployment Comp Bureau to let the Comp Bureau know that you've offered work to them and maybe they refused it, or the amount of earnings that you're now paying them, just to double check with, or at least provide that information in case the employee is not being completely honest with the UC office on the earnings.
Thank you, Kristi and Mike. Chad, another question for you. What is your opinion? Would a discretionary 401k plan contribution count as an eligible payroll expense under the PPP program?
Right now, as the guidance is written, that would qualify. You have to watch what year it's for. There are some verbiage about incurred and payments made related to these expenses. So as long as that discretionary contribution, if we can allocate it to the 8-week forgiveness period, we certainly think there's reason that can be claimed. But again, exactly how they're going to consider those retirement contributions in forgiveness is something that we're closely watching for the forgiveness rules, so we make sure that we're providing accurate advice.
Okay, and Chad, to build on the PPP, what advice would you give someone that is getting concerned about the shortage of the PPP money?
Well, the EIDL grant that we mentioned earlier is a small drop in the bucket. It's around a $10,000 cap based on employee count. There are the EIDL loans, and also a Main Street lending program that the Fed Reserve put some information out about around 2 weeks ago. So there are a couple other tools for capital that are available. Also, if none of those seem to work, there is the employee retention credit. So if you are keeping your employees and they're actively working, there are potentially some credits available to you that if you are taking a PPP loan are not. There's payroll tax deferrals and some other things to help with liquidity. I think outside of those items, I'd go back to some of the general cash flow suggestions that we've posted on the website in regards to just how to navigate this and what can we do to triage and make our cash flow work, under our current operating situation. So there are some other things to consider. And we don't know if there'll be a round 3 of funding or not, as Tom mentioned earlier. So I don't know if this is the end or just, the second round of what may end up being some more funding down the line.
Thank you, Chad. And Kristi, this is a Pennsylvania-specific question. It says the Commonwealth will require that they created the COVID-19 safety procedures for businesses flyer to be clearly displayed at workplaces. Do you know if the flyer is available for PA yet?
I don't know. Mike, have you heard anything?
She broke up a little bit reading the question. I couldn't hear the front part about the type of form.
Mike, it is the flyer that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is requiring to be clearly displayed in workforces. It's called the COVID-19 Safety Procedures for Businesses flyer.
Yeah, I'm not aware if that's out. Best place to look would be the Department of Health website.
Alrighty, thank you. And Kristi, another one for you. Can an employee not come back to work and collect unemployment due to having to be home with their children?
Again, that kind of feeds off of what we have talked to, that if an employee refuses to work making themselves unavailable, they may jeopardize their ability to collect unemployment. Again, it really comes down to the unemployment office as to whether or not the reason is sufficient within their guidelines to approve it or deny the claim. So we don't really have an option. I think the other part of this is, when employees refuse to come back to work, now you have potentially an open position, and what do? Do you look to hire somebody else? Do you hold the position? And as Mike had said, it depends. What message are you trying to send? What are the other circumstances surrounding that individual? And so it's not a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter type of approach or process you can use.
Thanks, Kristi. This next one's going to be for Chad. It says, regarding incurred and paid expenses for PPP eligibility, if payroll lags employee timesheets, i.e. employees are paid biweekly, does the payroll for the final 8-week period for the PPP coverage need to be accelerated so that it is incurred and paid within that 8-week period?
Yes, I think, in my opinion, based on how the regs are written right now, that would be the most conservative thing to do to ensure that those payroll wages count toward the forgiveness. There are some interpretations that, that incurred and payments made wording may allow you to count the payrolls that are just paid, even if the days are outside the period, and vice versa, even, count the days that are in the period but paid outside. But I think I would suggest just making sure you get it in there to accelerate that payroll. And with that said, we're hoping that the final guidance clears that up, because it's a lot of work really for, little benefit in terms of the spirit of the law, which is to pay people for 8 weeks. So, if you look at it conceptually, just the need to jump through hoops to get those pay periods to fall with an arbitrary funding date really just seems to be outside of what the intent is.
Okay, and Kristi, another one for you. It says small business, less than 8 employees on the paid 2 weeks of COVID leave pay. Can you force the employees to use all of their PTO first?
You can never require an employee to use their PTO. You can suggest it. And the unemployment office will encourage employees to use any leave they have available, but yeah, we can't force. Mike, do you have anything else?
No, you're right. That's exactly how the regulations word it for the emergency paid sick leave.
And another one for you, Kristi. It says, do you have any advice for an hourly employee in the restaurant industry who is advised to claim unemployment by their employer, but has not been able to access the website because it continuously is crashing?
Yeah, what I would recommend is trying to do it off-peak hours, so first thing in the morning, late in the evening. That might be the best when there's less volume. I know at the beginning of the week, Sunday, Monday is when everybody's trying to file their claim for the prior week or two, so just trying to avoid those high peak times would be my only suggestion. There was an email address available, but that is a 1-week turnaround time, so it's not speedy or fast, and when you call in, you don't even have the opportunity really to speak to somebody unless you wait hours. So I don't know of any other trick.
And Chad, it says, we use the Social Security tax deferral prior to receiving the PPP loan. After the loan, we have fully paid the taxes. Are we able to defer again if necessary after the 8-week period?
My understanding is that after the 8-week period, I don't believe you're able to do so after the forgiveness is determined. But the IRS did clarify a few weeks back that you're allowed to defer up until the point of forgiveness being determined on those PPP loans. So you may be able to continue to defer now during the 8-week period, but my understanding is that once the forgiveness determination has been made, as it's written right now, you're no longer able to defer those employer portions of the Social Security tax.
And another
Chad,
one for you.
Excuse me, Kelly, could I add something there to Chad's comment on that? Yeah, I think what we're understanding about the employee deferral is it not only goes to the end of the 8-week period, but it goes then from the end of the 8-week period until the forgiveness is granted. which we've said could be, 30 days, 60 days, I would take into account a little bit of what Secretary Mnuchin said today as well. For those loans that are potentially going to be audited, what he said was the forgiveness will not be given until the audit of them, whatever that means, is complete. So that could stretch that a little bit further to the forgiveness is given. So that, again, could stretch that deferral period out. That's kind of brand new as of today, as Chad said, but that could lengthen that period.
Alrighty, and Chad, I'm going to keep you on the line here. It says, can we use some of our PPP money towards the computer software renewals in order to keep working?
In terms of computer software renewals, we're not quite sure if that's going to count as rent. Really, that would be the only item that would be forgivable and an allowable cost under the PPP. What you can do, though, is use your operating funds and use the PPP to supplement to cover those if the guidance does not clarify that. But really, it's meant to be rent and leases, and I haven't seen anything clear that defines that software licenses will qualify for that per se.
Alrighty, and I think that we have time for at least one more question here. And Chad, you're going to be the lucky one to close us out here. If we have prepaid our rent till May, can we push that to the future months so we can use the PPP to pay May through June rent?
I think that I just written now that incurred and payments made guidance I think is going to prevent you from claiming rent that was not paid during the 8-week forgiveness period. Again, I'm hoping that some of the final regulations clarify that maybe we are able to do those things because rents and things like that don't necessarily fall into the 8-week period very nicely. But I'm not sure what that will look like. But right now I would say no, that's not something that you're able to do.
Okay, and we do still have a couple questions here, and I will remind everybody that our presenters will go through and answer these, and they will be sent out via email and a link to the document. So I'll turn it over to Tom to close us out here.
Okay, well, thank you, Kaylee. And again, thank you, everyone, for your attendance. We really appreciate everyone coming back to these town halls week by week. We certainly look forward to talking to you and sharing this information, and we appreciate all your kind comments as well. Again, a big thank you to Mike Crescenzi for joining us today from Barley Snyder. A lot of really interesting comments today that I think are very relevant for all of you as you kind of negotiate getting all your employees back on staff. And as always, a big thank you for the SN team, not only the speakers, but the marketing group and everyone else who helps make these things happen each week. So as we always say, again, keep the communication lines open, reach out to us during the week. We'll get those questions answered for you. We'll keep a watch on what's going on. Hopefully, we'll keep our fingers crossed that we have some forgiveness guidance by next week, because we know that is the big question of the day, and really, means a lot of dollars for all of our businesses. So as soon as that information is available, we will certainly be sharing it with you. So everyone, keep doing what you're doing. We're starting to win this battle. Hopefully the end is going to be near. But until that time happens, we'll be here with you every Tuesday. Join us again next Tuesday, May 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see you then. Thank you.